Change my heart, oh God. Make it ever true.
Welcome to this third and last video in our short introduction to the 9 illusions. It's really as short as I can make it. If you want something more comprehensive, go to my website on the videos page and you will find a series of 10 that will give you much more detail. If you're serious about this, I really recommend that. Now, people often ask me, how do I go about identifying what I am on the Enneagram? And I'm quite surprised at how few people do it successfully. I always say, don't concentrate too much on the behavior. Concentrate on the energy which drives your personality, and that's a lot harder to find. Now, every one of the 9 has a deep need, and that need leads to the energy that drives your personality. Now, one behavior can actually be driven by energy of 4 or 5 of the personality types. For example, if someone really works to be right, that doesn't mean to say they're necessarily a perfectionist. A perfectionist does have the need to be right. But a number 3 may work to be right simply because it looks good, that's their need. A number 6 may work to be right simply because they have a deep need to conform. A number 8 may work to be right simply because he wants to show others up and he is driven to be tough. A number 9 may work to be right simply because it's the best way of flying under the radar and avoiding conflict. So don't look so much at the behavior, try to identify the need which is arising within you and the energy that that creates. Well, now we move on to the fun lover. Their need is to avoid pain. The illusion of the number 7 is, if only I can be light-hearted, everything will be okay. They are afraid of pain, especially emotional and mental pain, and they are constantly looking at ways to avoid or palliate pain. Now, no one likes pain, but they are particularly afraid of pain. And so one of their favorite phrases would be, let's talk about something more cheerful, or always look on the bright side of life, which is very nice, but there is a danger of shallowness in that, because sometimes hard things need to be faced. The besetting sin of the number 7 is gluttony or intemperance. That's not necessarily for food or drink, but for anything that alleviates or helps them to avoid pain. That can be alcohol, it can be sex, it can be soap operas, it can even be just watching too much sport. Anything to avoid facing the hard things. And as a result, they are vulnerable to addictions. I discovered that quite a number of alcoholics are number 7s. I found this out when I went with a friend to AA for his party to celebrate 10 years sober. Notice that they throw a party, and it was a really nice party. They were really fun people. The only problem I had is that I could hardly see across the room for the smoke, because quite often they use a lesser addiction to help them cope with the greater one. But they were fun. So what do number 7s bring when they are redeemed? Well, they bring many things, but I'm going to cut down to only one. They bring joy. We all need joy in our lives, and fun. My t-shirt is a little nod towards the fun lover. The animal for the fun lover is the monkey, jumping from tree to tree, having a ball. They really don't take life very seriously, but they can be shallow. You don't often see a group of monkeys sitting and discussing the problems in the Middle East. Now, which character in the Gospel of John would be the fun lover? Well, here's the thing, I couldn't find one. I couldn't find one in all the Gospels. I couldn't find one in the whole New Testament, and I wondered what's going on. I wonder if the scribes and Pharisees had put such a pall of oppression on the people that they'd squeezed the fun out of everything. And then, of course, there was the overriding rule of the Roman Empire. It wasn't much fun in Israel in the first century. And so I'm going to turn to Jesus for the example of the number 7. The most amazing thing is that Jesus shows the strengths and avoids the weakness of all 9 perfectly. No one in history has ever done that. There have been great men, I think of Gandhi and Churchill, great men, but they had glaring weaknesses. Perhaps the 2 men I would most call good from history would be Abraham Lincoln and our own Nelson Mandela. Very good men, and by the way, both had an acute sense of fun. But there's no way we would say they were perfect in all 9. Only Jesus could show that, the perfect man. Now we all know that Jesus said to his disciples, "I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete." He saw himself as a joyful person, a completely joyful person, a man of sorrows, but also joyful, not shallow. Very important is the story in John chapter 2 of the turning water into wine. A wedding took place in Cana of Galilee, and Jesus was invited to the wedding. Why do you think he was invited? Well, I suspect he was invited because he was real fun to have at a celebration. But this miracle really seems like the least important miracle Jesus ever performed. I mean, when he healed a blind man or healed a leper, that totally changed someone's life. But just to provide some wine so a young couple wouldn't be embarrassed, was that really important enough for a miracle? Well, firstly, I think Jesus just couldn't bear to see a young couple have their joyful occasion spoiled, because he's a man of joy. But there's more to it than that. Wine throughout the Old Testament is a symbol of joy, and he now goes and produces a ridiculous amount of wine. And I think what he is saying is, I have come into the world to bring joy, abundant joy. And there's more still. He starts his ministry by comparing himself to a bridegroom, full of joy, and the kingdom of God will be a very joyful thing. Good news for the world. In Matthew 11, he says to the people, John came neither eating nor drinking, and they say he is a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say he is a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. Well, he certainly was a friend of tax collectors and sinners, and often went to big dinners, parties with them. I'm quite sure he wasn't a glutton or a drunkard at all, but the implication is that he enjoyed himself. And that's the wonderful gift of the fun lover. I found a very interesting study. Here are the 38 parables that Jesus gave, and he uses lots of different subjects, salt, lamp, builders, cloth, and so on. And he doesn't use any of them twice, doesn't repeat, except for one, the theme of a feast. 4 of them. Remember that the parable of the 10 virgins took place at a wedding feast. But not only that, the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the prodigal son, all those parables end with a party. Come and rejoice with me. The conclusion I read at the end of those parables is the kingdom of God is a feast. It's fun. The kingdom of God for Jesus is a party, above all other things. Now we turn to number 8, the tough guy. This is the Bucky's Boerter of this world who loves to run down the rugby field with one kneecap hanging off. The illusion of the tough guy is if only I can be strong, everything will be okay and people won't reject me. Actually, they're afraid of weakness. They fear weakness in themselves, and so they scorn it in others. Actually, they're very afraid that they are weak, and inside they're really scared little boys, and if you can face them down, you'll often get on terms with them. Their besetting sin is lust or self-gratification, not only sexually, although that is true, but for anything they want. They just grab, they rape the world. And they're prone to harshness and cruelty. They operate out of bad boy energy. They do not mind being against. The animal for the tough guy is the buffalo. Very short-tempered, very dangerous, and at the slightest provocation he will charge you head on and hurt you. But the buffalo is very short-sighted. All number 8s are short-sighted. They don't see the long-term results of their harshness and cruelty. But because they're short-sighted, they're quite easy to step aside from. I believe if you run at right angles to a buffalo, he loses sight of you and you escape him, and sometimes that's the best thing to do with the number 8. But when they are redeemed, of course, they give strength, authority, and courage. You always know where you stand with the number 8. And they make good profits because they aren't scared and they don't mind being against. And at their very best, they are very fierce and strong protectors of the weak. So which character in the Gospel of John do you think signifies the number 8? Well, we've only got 3 left. It's John the Baptist. Now, John the Baptist was born with a tough guy personality, but he was always redeemed. John's clothes were made of camel's hair. He had a leather belt around his waist, and his food was locusts and wild honey. Have you ever worn camel's hair? I once felt it. It's very rough. Have you ever eaten live locust? He was tough, and he lived in the desert. Then John said to the crowds coming to be baptized by him, "You brood of vipers, who warned you to flee the wrath to come? The axe is already laid to the root of the tree, and every tree that does not produce fruit will be cut down and thrown into the fire." Notice the harshness of that. Brood of vipers. Have you ever dared to talk to someone like that? Notice the violent image of the axe laid to the root and the trees cut down, thrown into fire. Very tough guy imagery. And then in Luke 3, John rebuked Herod the Tetrarch because of his marriage to Herodias, his brother's wife, and all the other evil things he had done. So Herod locked John up in prison. John was not afraid to rebuke Herod, whatever the consequences. He's got strength and he doesn't mind being against. And he pays the price. But fascinatingly, in Matthew 11, Jesus said to the crowd about John, "What did you go into the wilderness to see? A reed swayed by a wind? A man dressed in fine clothes?" In other words, John was not a reed swayed in the wind. You couldn't bend him. He was a tough guy. He was strong. And he didn't dress in fine clothes. He dressed in rough clothes. But Jesus goes on to say, he was a prophet, I tell you, and more than a prophet. No greater prophet has come to Israel. The redeemed 8 gets the highest praise from Jesus. It's interesting, isn't it, that Jesus never used his power to set John free from prison. I think because he sensed that John was already free, the redeemed number 8. And now we turn to number 9, the peacemaker. The illusion of the peacemaker is, if only I can avoid conflict, everything will be okay and people won't reject me. They are afraid of conflict and they go to considerable lengths to avoid it. They need to learn that peace at any price is no peace and comes at a terrible price. Their besetting sin is sloth or laziness. Not that they're physically lazy people. They may be actually very busy with their job or with the tennis club or whatever it may be. But their busyness is often an escape from facing issues that they really need to face. They're lazy morally. They avoid tough decisions. And they're escaping from difficult things that need to be said or done, especially if conflict might be involved. The animal for the number 9 is the sloth. Now that very word means laziness. Look how he just hangs under that branch hoping that no one will notice him. And look at that great dragon above there. He's hanging there just hoping the trouble will go away. But the thing that 9s need to learn is that some trouble doesn't just go away. It has to be made to go away. And that's where their laziness can come in. Once a number 9 has been redeemed, they bring the wonderful gifts of peacefulness and calmness. They're easy companions. They really do pour oil on troubled waters. They are peacemakers. And sometimes being a peacemaker requires courage because it involves coming between warring parties and you might get shot at by both sides. So which character in the Gospel of John do you think represents the number 9? Well, we only have 2 left, Lazarus and Martha. Well, Martha's been the red herring all along because Martha, I believe, is a second example of the number 8. She's a very tough woman. The house is called Martha's home, not Lazarus's. She's very direct. She says, "Tell Mary to help me." And when she meets Jesus after Lazarus has died, if you'd only been here, he wouldn't have died. And when they go to the graveside and Jesus says, "Move away the stone," she doesn't couch anything in easy language. She says, "He already stinketh." I believe Martha's a number 8. So who's the number 9? Well, it's Lazarus. Now, I must admit, we don't have a lot of evidence about Lazarus. the Bible doesn't say much about him. Do you know how many times we hear Lazarus saying something? The answer is 0. The Bible doesn't record one word that Lazarus said. But what we do know is when Jesus came to the grave of Lazarus, he wept, and the Jews said, "See how he loved him." Now, of course, Jesus loved a lot of people, but sometimes a 9 is particularly easy to love. And then a dinner was given in Jesus' honor after Lazarus was raised from the dead, and Lazarus was reclining at the table with him. Notice that, reclining at the table. It's very restful, it's very peaceful. And the fact that he never said anything to me is a sign of the number 9. He didn't demand anything of Jesus, he never contradicted Jesus. That's the 9. Very easy people to be with. Now, because our evidence on Lazarus is a little flimsy, let's look at Jesus, the peacemaker. Jesus, perfect in all 9. Jesus had an inner peace. When they were in the boat in a storm and the disciples were fearing for their lives, Jesus was asleep in the stern on a cushion. He could sleep through a storm. And when he woke up, what does he say to the wind and the waves? Peace, be still. His calmness even has an influence on nature. The only one of the 9 that he mentions in the Sermon on the Mount is, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be the children of God." He said to his disciples at the end, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you." He knew he had peace, and he knew he could share it. And he said to the disciples, when you go on your missionary journeys, when you come to a house, first thing you say, "Peace be to this house." He knew that peace is something that can be shared. But most important of all, in Colossians, God reconciled all things to himself, making peace through Jesus' blood shed on the cross. Jesus, the great reconciler, the greatest peacemaker the world has ever known. And so we're finished. Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. But let me end with a story. Very early in my ministry, I belonged to a very good ministers' fraternal. And one day the Anglican priest turned up looking very down, and we said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "Well, my daughter has just told me that she's no longer coming to church. She said, 'Dad, it's nothing to do with you, but it's that so few of your congregation live out what they say they believe.'" That actually became a defining story in my whole ministry. I became so concerned. There are so many Christians, I'm sure they're born again, I'm sure they're going to heaven, but somehow the grace of God doesn't seem to have got down into their personalities. And that's why I use the Enneagram. It's a very useful tool for helping to see what they need to work on in their personality. It's only a tool, it's only a model. If it doesn't work for you, that's fine. You find another way. But my real desire is that more Christians would glorify God with their personality.